Thank you for tuning in to Macroview Television and welcome to a brand new edition of Taiwan Outlook, the program that presents the different faces and lets you hear their stories on Taiwan. I'm your host, Wu Ruiguo. Do you know what Voluntourism is? And what is the difference between Voluntourist and international volunteering? We're going to find out on today's program because we're delighted to have Mr. Cyril Chu, 楚士瑩先生, as our special guest to talk about his experiences working with the international NGOs in Myanmar for over 10 years. Welcome to our program, Cyril.
Hi, hello, all the friends of Taiwan Outlook, and thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. And let me ask you this. Cyril, you know, a lot of people know that you're a well-known writer and that you travel to different places, different parts of the world, and share your experiences. But still, as a practice on the program, I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, including your education and work experience.
Sure.
Please.
I was born and raised in Taiwan until high school, and then I start my journey by going to Singapore, Egypt for college and graduate school, and then eventually ended up in the East Coast in America. But most of my career is in Southeast Asia as a development worker for the last 20 years. So I'm really happy to be here to share the experience.
Of course, we're looking forward to that. And Cyril, let me ask you, as I said at the beginning of the program, what is the difference between international voluntourist and international traveling? Because a lot of people say, hey, he travels, I travel too. You know, I go to different places. What's the difference as to what you do when you travel and what normally other people would do when they travel? Please.
For example, I look myself as a development worker. So I working for the international NGO, and a lot of times I can only do things that within the organizational mandate. But it doesn't mean that is the most important things in the world, but there's not much I can do otherwise. So I'm just thinking, if I also recognize the cause. I want to do something about it, but I cannot do anything from my professional point of view. Then what can I do in my private time? But like anybody who has a full-time job, that I can only have some a week or 2 weeks of vacation a year. So if I use my private time to do some volunteer work, and along the way, I'm having some fun. And that is how I bring myself as a voluntourist. So something that I cannot do at work, but also it doesn't ruin my vacation.
And when did you first start doing this? And what were the reasons? You know, I mean, this is something new, I believe it was for you. As you know, it was for a lot of other people. But you know, how did you know that what Voluntourist is, and why did you want to do it that time, in your life?
I think it started about 20 years ago. I was invited to go to Mongolia for the reforestation project that is done by the Japanese nonprofit organization. And during that time, I see that there's no way I can do that full time. But within a short period of time, if I can make some difference and I can have some fun, to go to a new place and to know some friends, and maybe we become friends for life, and there will be a wonderful way to travel.
Yes, of course.
I realize that is the healthy alternative for somebody who loves to travel, but is just tired of just being a backpacker or join the tour group and want to do something different. But at the same time, I also remember that I don't call myself a volunteer, international volunteer, and just call myself a voluntourist. So that I remember, I'm not here to change the world.
No.
I'm just coming here to learn and having the experience, and hopefully along the way, I can make a little difference in having some fun.
After that first trip to Mongolia, you subsequently ended up in Myanmar.
Exactly.
But Myanmar today, of course, is in the process of some pretty, amazing changes. But, back then, some, 10 plus years ago, Myanmar was a very different place.
It was very different,
Yes, may I ask, why did you pick Myanmar? Was it because you have some friends over there, or you had some prior knowledge about the country? What was the reason?
I went to Kennedy School for Public Policy. At the time,
Harvard,
I was
yes.
focusing on the isolated society development.
Okay.
So I actually started my career in the small South Pacific Islands and the Native American tribes in the U.S. But to me, the ultimate prize is going to two of the largest closed society, isolated society at that time, which is Myanmar and North Korea. So I just promised myself, if there's any career opportunity in any one of those two countries, no matter which field it is, as long as it's for NGO development field, I'm going to say yes.
Good.
So apparently the North Korea opportunity didn't come up for a long, long time. But Myanmar project came up, and I decided I'm going to honor my own commitment and do it. But of course, there was 2002. Like you mentioned, it was a very different time and very different era.
Yes. And what was the reaction from your family and friends when you said that, I want to start my career in Myanmar doing this NGO work? What was the reaction?
At that time, I think people know very little about Myanmar.
Exactly.
And also knowing very little about the risk. So I just try not to talk too much about it. Because I'm working for the US-based organization, so I focus on that part and saying, I just get an assignment to go to Myanmar for a couple of years, and it is for organic farming. It's going to be in a really nice area. You probably won't be able to hear from me for a couple of weeks or so whenever I'm in the country, but nothing to worry about. Of course, there was tremendous mental pressure in the first few years.
Of course.
There is a certain amount of risk involved in my job. But also, I realized I learned a lot from it, and my family, my friends, they do see I'm a much happier person when I'm doing that work. So they are my biggest supporter.
Yes. And Cyril, let me ask you, I mean, you started in Shanshan, Shan State. And then why Shan State? I mean, this is a place well known for human trafficking, drug trade, and other things, organized crime. Why this place?
Apparently, you've done your homework.
I'll try.
Actually, Myanmar today, I don't know if you know about the administrative divisions.
No.
They actually having 7 divisions and 7 states. So total, they have 14 administrative regions. And if a place is called state, that means it is a place pretty much occupied by the ethnic minorities. And if it's called region, then most of them are Burma, which is the ruling party and the mainstream, the biggest ethnic group. So Shan State, as you can see, it is a minority area, but it's not just Shan people. There are about 10 different ethnic groups occupy this vast land that everything is going on from what you suggested, human trafficking, a lot of drug lords pretty much control the whole economy, and also because it's bordering the China in the north, so it become the most important underground economy route. If we're talking about the drug usage among the young people between the age 18 and 40, we're talking about over 70%, 70. So it's quite a mess, and it's I don't think it's much better right now. But to me, for somebody who really want to learn about the development issue and want to make a difference, to me there was an opportunity because they need everything. Anything is possible. So I focus on the food security because the civil war was still going on. It's actually still going on right now. So if there's a war breaks out, then people won't be able to feed themselves, and the livelihood will be gone. The food sustainability is not there. Then how can people survive? So we're trying to focus on the fundamental, and to me, of course, there's a very steep learning curve because I'm not an agriculture background. I'm a development worker.
Okay.
So it was really exciting for me to learn about it in the place that for the opportunity, but also for the risks.
Okay. And Cyril, let me ask you this. We're going to put all the politics aside, and we're going to ask you your observation about the land itself and about the people. You said that, the Shan State, because it's, mostly minority people. Who are they? How's their lifestyle, different from the mainstream? Please.
It is still, if you go to the rural setting, the semi-urban area, they're still living the lifestyle that was not much different from the 100 years ago.
Really?
Because I remember every time I show a volunteer a picture, a portrait that was drawn 200 years ago, and then put in the exactly the village setting, and then say, this is exactly the life they're living today as of their ancestor 200 years ago. Can you imagine yourself being dropped to 200 years ago in Taiwan? Will you be able to survive?
No.
The answer is no. So how can an isolated society learn in the internet age that when everybody's starting to have mobile phone, to have internet access, and there's a lot of outside interest to coming in as investors, as a tourist, how are they preparing themselves to face the outside world? And so we're trying to create a safe environments in a small dosage for them to be able to meet the people from outside and learn about the skills in the hospitality field. That how can they treat foreigner rightly, and what kind of task they need to learn before they will be able to integrate it with the mainstream society. So to me, we're bringing the people who living the lifestyle that hasn't changed for hundreds of years. To drop into 2015. And that's a big task.
That's a giant leap, yes. And Cyril, let's go back to the fundamental question. People talk about, being a tourist. I go to a foreign country, a new place. I want to see beautiful things. I want to, have happy experiences. Go to, sites, take pictures, have wonderful food, the local authentic cuisines and things. But if you're, international voluntourist, you actually see the reality, some of which may be kind of brutal, kind of, different than what you expected. Do you agree with such an assessment?
In a general sense, I would say yes.
Okay.
Because all the volunteers, they come in with a pure heart and say, I want to do the right thing.
Yes.
But often, have no idea how to do things right. So in the organized way, if there's a voluntourist organizer can put in the safe and controlled environments and to drop them in the ongoing project, it would be a great opportunity for them to just jump into it and then try to make some difference and learn something about it and have a incredible experience, but at the same time, they can at least do no harm. Because we do see a lot of volunteers because lack of training or lack of cultural understanding, so they're actually doing more damage than good. And I keep going back to the first Voluntourism experience that I was in Mongolia for planting trees for the reforestation. Then I keep thinking the conversation I had with a local. They say, why? There's an old man in the village and say, why are you volunteering? Who pay for your ticket? I say, I pay for my own. And then you say, you silly person, that if they don't pay me at the end of the day, every day, I will not come here to work at this farm to plant trees. I don't care. They have to pay me. So I'm just thinking, why are there so many volunteers? They want to empty their own pockets and use their own money and time to volunteer, but it doesn't make any difference in the local community. Is that right? And if I leave, and they're not paying the local to water the plants, then all the efforts that we're making right now is completely useless. Okay. So that experience completely remind me that if I'm having my own program, for example, the farm organic farm in the Shan State.
Yes.
I say, what can I do to try to make the difference, to mobilize the local community, and also to do no harm? And that is something that I learned from the experience that back in the days when myself is a voluntourist.
Okay. And given the fact that you have spent over 10 years in Shan State.
Yes.
And we also discussed briefly, this is a very complicated area, with illegal, drugs, with human trafficking, organized crime. And you are running a very important project, as you still do, in the region, in the state. And can you tell us a little bit first about your experience overall in Shan State, with the people, with the land itself? And second, can you talk to us about your project in Shan State, please?
Okay. Like what I mentioned briefly earlier, the Shan State, part of the northern Shan State is still the war zone.
Yeah.
So they still have the armed groups locally. Okay. And not just one, but between 2 and 4. Okay. So even they have signed a ceasefire agreement, but it's very fragile. So the war can break off at any moment. And at that point, the people that will be suffering. Even they're being caught in between 2 militant groups. So what I trying to do is using the permaculture concept and say, is there any way that we can build an organic farm that no matter what happens, as an isolated society in the enclosed environments, at least we can definitely survive in the long term without relying on the external help. But in order to do that, I need to get blessing from, for example, the drug lords, because the land used to be growing opium, but now it has to be using for something else. I need to get a blessing from the warlords. Because this is in the middle of the war zone. The government actually doesn't have full control of it. But I also need to get blessing from the government because the government is not happy that we are working in the enemy's territory. So they're thinking we are sided with the armed groups.
Yes.
And at the same time, the villagers, the local community members, they are not happy either. Because we're working with the poor of the poor community members, which are the Nepalese and the Shan farmers, instead of the Kokand, which is the ethnic Chinese, who are usually control the economy. So they feel like, how come this project doesn't benefit our ethnic Chinese? But in fact, they are not the people who are in the most desperate situation. So we also have a lot of clash with the ethnic Chinese. So that means we, in the beginning stage, for about 5 to 6 years, we do having a lot of confrontational situations facing with all kinds of different stakeholders. And how are we going to communicate and try to translate our concept into the way that everybody can understand. And even if they don't support, at least there's no objections. For example, we eventually having the government to sign, instead of a memorandum, we call the MOU, they signed a no objection documents. So at least they're not against your project. And that is the kind of blessing that we need. And it really takes time, and I really learned a lot from the process. And it's all about communications.
And let me ask you, Cyril, I mean, this is not easy because you identify the different groups. They all have a stake in the process. And you're the ones, and you and your colleagues, cohorts, are the ones bringing the changes to their way of life, to the way that the stakes used to be distributed, and you're trying to be the catalyst for change. And how do you then reconcile the differences? How do you see, from their perspective, about the best way or the most plausible solution that they will be able to accept? And this is, given the fact that this is also a brand new country, working with people and the culture that you are not familiar with. How do you do it?
I think I was a very, very different person when I began, because at that time, I freshly coming as a public policy graduate and feel like I have a lot to offer, especially after a few years working in different community. So in a way, I didn't know I was arrogant, but I was.
Okay.
I feel like I'm coming here to help you. But as it turned out, it's a very long unlearning process that I'm going through. Is to drop everything that I thought I knew and to starting from the beginning by listening. So how do I know what is something the community really need? Is it something that I feel like they need, or they identify that is something they want? And between what they want and what they need, there might also some gap. And how can we identify the real needs from want? So we actually working with a community together and try to starting from scratch. And I just, by being a listener and trying to translate what they really need into programs. And so we reverse the process. Instead of having international funding and identify a project, a location, and having the community try to adapt their lifestyle into our program, otherwise they won't be able to benefit from it. We reverse it. We say, let's sit down and talk about it and go through the consultation process and tell us what you want, what you need, and what is accessible in the short term, mid-term, and the long term. And then let's go to the organization to try to find funding. And so to me, there was a completely refreshing, it's a long way, but it's a great experience that I'm having.
Yeah, it was also a very wise change in terms of strategy, because instead of going through from top down, so to speak, you're going from bottom up. And given the fact that you are running something that they are not familiar with, but even though this is something very fundamental, food, you know, and you know, what were some of your biggest concerns? Because you mentioned this is also a territory where used to be, you know, wars back, you know, conflicts, you know, back and forth. So what were some of your concerns? Not just only for your project, but also for you personally.
I think during the process, I learned more to be a practicing philosopher. For example, if we're running a farm, we think about the economic value. We're saying, if you're not growing opium, then let's try to identify the crops that has the highest commercial values. Without realizing, if that is something so valuable, then you're challenging the deepest part of human's nature. Because you're dealing with people who are stealing, who are jealous, who trying to destroy your efforts. So how can we make our farm as unattractive as possible become our goal? Because if the goal is the food forest that can supply all the food the community needs, even if there's a war. But we don't want the outside investor to look at the field and say, there are a lot of teak woods, there are redwoods, we want to just kick away all the local community and make a whole lot of money out of it. Then that is when we're trying to think, how can we try to make our community, the forest, the farm, unattractive, but at the same time, that has everything the community needs. So it was a very interesting balance that we're trying to reach.
Good. We're going through some of your experiences in, Myanmar, and we understand that you have committed yourself to the organic farm project, as well as, try to set up a sort of like a brand new way for people to try to work out their differences, try to negotiate for a settlement that's, acceptable to all parties. But also, we understand that you have a brand new project that's, undergoing at this point, which is to set up a publishing company on children's pictorial books. May I ask why you want to do such a thing? Please.
First, I believe education is the key to the future. So we're doing the the food security project, they can feed the people immediately, but it doesn't mean that their life is going to be changing forever. Only education can do that. But before 2015, there's still censorship. So there's no way that we can set up an independent publishing company. But right now, under the new law, we will be able to do so. And because my very first project in Myanmar is about the early childhood development project, and then we're realizing through the supporting of the educational project, there's very little that we can do other than feeding the children and keep them healthy. But in terms of curriculum, it's very dated. They're still using the same textbook from 40, 50 years ago. And all the teachers are still using the only method is trying to memorize everything instead of trying to understand or trying to teach the kids how to think. So we think with a small publishing company, they're focusing on the practicing philosophies, and the kids will be benefit from just getting out of the tradition and think out of the box, try to think about the fundamental questions like who am I, and what is beauty, what is good, what is bad, what is freedom, and all those big questions that for the last hundreds of years that the people of Myanmar doesn't have the luxury to think. And I think that is get back to the roots of why there's a never-ending war. So if we can change how people think through education, through the philosophical education, then something in the long term that might changing for the better. I hope.
Good. And Cyril, what's so far the reaction from the public with the the books that you're publishing? Are they now really having an eye-opening experience, or these are something that we never read before, or are they a little more reluctant, saying that hey, I don't know if the government approves this? What is their reaction?
In the beginning, again, I made the same mistake. I thought it was a wonderful idea, but it doesn't necessarily translate into the local community and recognizing my cause. They do think education is important. They also think trying to change the kids to think is important, but not in the way that I'm picturing. Because in the beginning, we're using the books translated from a French philosopher, and which I think is wonderful. And then they're starting to demand the local context and say, through the society and the structure of the family, we shouldn't say that, we shouldn't think that. But in the beginning, I was quite resisting. I said, that's exactly, not only the kids need to learn, you grown-ups need to learn as well. You cannot tell me that it's not right. But again, I went through the same unlearning process and tried to give myself a set of years, try to listen, and starting from scratch. And eventually, we're having the group of local education experts and to write their own curriculum and say, in the Myanmar context, what will work in terms of philosophical concepts. And that was interesting to see what the results are.
All right. And you mentioned earlier, Cyril, that Shan State is a place when there's a lot of temptation, especially for younger people. All right. We're talking specifically about drug trade. All right. So a lot of young people do not stay in school. They drop out. We understand that you have also devoted part of your efforts to help those young students who have dropped out of school. What did you do? What were the programs that you offered them? Please.
There are two systems in education. One is the governmental official education. And for those who cannot afford to go to the government school, there's a non-official education system that parallel to the government system. They're usually offered by the Buddhist monasteries or the churches. And that was the basically the last safety net for the kids before they become permanently drop out.
Okay.
So our effort is mostly trying to catch the people who in the brink of permanently dropping out from non-school, non-official education by trying to attracting them by offering school lunch or other incentives. So the family will say, instead of sending them to do the day labor, if the school can feed them, then that means there's a great help economically for the family. There's a one less mouth to feed. Then you might as well go to school. So we're using that kind of incentives, also the on-job training to link the school into the future job opportunities, as well as the food program. And that actually, we get pretty good results out of it, but you have to be creative and also trying to see it from the more holistic point of view. It's not just education. It's also food security. It's also livelihood. And you have to combine them all in order to make it work.
And also, a related problem, as you mentioned, is regarding child laborers in Myanmar. What are you doing? What are some of the programs that you're committed to in terms of helping the continuing deteriorating child laboring problems in Myanmar?
There are child laborers and there are child soldiers, and both are pretty serious problems.
Yes.
And the thing is, if you're the upper middle class Myanmar person, you don't see the problem yourself. For example, one of our volunteers, they come to our meeting to discuss about the child laborers with a 7-year-old child laborer following him and carrying the suitcase and the mobile phone. And he doesn't see any irony to it because every family has a few. And from his point of view, he's helping this child from the village that his family won't be able to feed him. So he's thinking sincerely he's trying to do some good. But he doesn't realize he's exactly at the problem itself. So we are not just focusing on the kids itself, but trying to change the perspective of the common people, the community members, and let them see maybe there's something going on here they're not realizing.
Okay, good. And Cyril, you're going through a lot of different countries, visiting new people, places, and you implementing a lot of different projects. And there must have been times that you're frustrated. You're disappointed with I putting a lot of efforts and time, and the results, were not satisfactory. How do you then overcome those personal obstacles and try to stay upbeat, optimistic the next day?
I think when I'm frustrated, I will get back to the point of why I left the corporate and decided to do this job, and why I enjoyed it. And I also remind myself with a phrase that the Dalai Lama said that I often recite and try to remember myself, because if I remember correctly, he basically saying this planet doesn't really need more successful people, but need more, urgently, desperately need more peacemakers, healers, restorers, storytellers, and the lovers of any kind. And so I'm just thinking, do I really need to be successful, or do I need to become one of those people that this world really need? So I try to redefine success and try to thinking if I'm one step closer towards the goal to become the person I like to become, then I feel better. Then I say, I'm still on the way. I'm still learning. And I'm still travel. I still, the life journey is exciting. And I like myself. I like what I'm doing. And that's the moment I realize I'm actually happy.
Good. And we have about 2 minutes left in this part of the program. Cyril, let me ask you, based on your own experience and observation, what are some of the pros and cons for being an international voluntourist? And what would be some of the qualities you think they need to have in order to be an international voluntourist?
I think the pro for the volunteer tourists is that you will be able to be dropping in the setting of an ongoing project and immediately being part of the process.
Yes.
Instead of spending years of preparations and be frustrated and things might not happen. So this is the pro, is you can be part of the project right away.
All right.
But the cons is, because you're being dropped off in the middle, you may not realize the risk or even the damage, the harms that you're doing to the community, and you probably take more to fix it. So I would think be humble is the key. Not that you have money, you have time, so you can be a voluntourist.
Okay.
You have to be humble enough and to realizing you're not coming here to change people's life. You're coming here to learn and having a little fun. So this little reminder, I think, is quite important.
Yeah, that is a very important reminder, yes. Cyril, we've been talking about your experiences in many parts of the world, Mongolia and Myanmar, and you travel quite a bit, of course, and you don't come back to Taiwan that much. You and I were talking before the taping started that you only here roughly about 1 month in the year. And every time you come back to Taiwan, what have you discovered to be different? And I'm not talking about new buildings or new roads and things, but talking about in terms of people's mindset. How do the people that you interact with, because every time you come back, I know that you interact quite a bit with the local NGOs. What's different, about their mindset? Please.
I haven't been really living in Taiwan full-time for the last 25 years. So to me, every time when I come back to Taiwan, even though that's where I'm from, I feel like I'm half a tourist myself.
Right.
So I do notice the difference. And one thing significant is there are more and more people have international exposure. People travel a lot, especially the younger generations. So they bring in the different perspective into the everyday life in Taiwan. I think it's a wonderful thing. And it's still evolving. And I would like to encourage the young people today doing more of it instead of less. The world is big.
Yes.
Try to find a dot in the world where you belong to and be brave, be open-minded. And I think we have already started it. And don't stop right here. Keep doing it. Keep the good job.
All right. And given the fact that you also, talk with a lot of young people in Taiwan, and what do you think, the young people, you already mentioned they are a little more, internationally oriented, but how can they continue to stay competitive internationally? Because we're talking about a global village.
Right.
I mean, that will only continue further in the future. And how can they compete with the youth from the United States, from China, from Japan, and other parts of the world?
Right. I'm not an expert in education field, especially higher education, so I can only offer my observation in the NGO field. I realizing the college graduates in a country like Philippines or Thailand, they can easily connecting themselves after the graduation to an international position in the World Bank, in the Asia Development Bank, in any one of the international organizations. But it will be very difficult to imagine a freshly graduated Taiwanese young person to be able to qualify to work in the International Monetary Fund, for example, or some of the large organizations in order to learn the experience and having the real international experience. So I think we really need to look at ourselves, what we have learned from our higher education, and whether there's a gap in terms of what the world needs and what we learn from school. So I think the best way that I always recommend to the people who are interested in getting to become a development worker is go to the website and try to find the job section on what are those organizations looking for, and to see what are you qualified for, and what are the points that you're missing, and how can you become the person that those international organizations want.
Okay.
And I think this is the preparation process that you can actually help yourself, and that is something that the school will not be able to teach you. Okay. You can only help yourself.
Okay. And Cyril, we understand that Taiwan has always been trying to get more international visibility, shall we say. And we have, of course, I agree with you, the younger generations are a lot more internationally oriented than the days when we were in school. And given the fact that we also have many volunteers in different parts of the world doing, very similar work as you do, what are some of the areas that, based on your observation, that Taiwan can do even better in the years ahead? Continue doing some of the local assistance program, aid program, education. What would be some of the areas that you would suggest?
I think there's some soul searching that we need to go through.
Okay.
That what are the niche for the Taiwanese volunteers that can make a difference?
Yes.
Instead of trying to do the simple task like building the house with adobe, that is something we don't do in Taiwan and we don't do well. So in terms of when we're going overseas to do those tasks, we actually create more trouble than help. We actually need to be professional to offer something that only we can offer, and that is something people really need. Like in the past, in a few decades in the agriculture field, the Taiwanese has been offering quite a professional technical helps in a lot of developing country for that. And I think that is one niche that we've been doing successfully. But what is the second niche in terms of what the world needs and what we can offer is professional and is meaningful instead of just doing it for the sake of volunteering.
Okay. And let me ask you this, Cyril, it's now 2016. What's next on the agenda for you this year? Any particular project other than those ones that we discussed that you are thinking of doing?
I'm still focusing on Myanmar. Of course, it's different from 15 years ago when I started it, but the war is still going on. So I'm more focusing on the war zone with the IDP, what we call the internal displacement persons. Try to end the world, and people who are displaced, who are refugees, start to think about after the war, the post-war development, how can they get back to their normal life, and what's the education, what's the livelihood, what's the opportunity and risk that we need to think about. So this is going to be occupy most of my 2016, I guess.
Good. Yeah, that's plenty on the agenda. And Cyril, let me ask you, a lot of people came to know you, hopefully today through our program. But before then, they learn about you, learn about your experiences in international Voluntourist, as, through your books. You have written almost 50 books. And may I ask you first, why did you want to start writing? I mean, obviously, people would think that you want to share your experiences, or let people know about the places and the people that you have met and been to. But I think there's something bigger and deeper than that. What is it?
At personal level, for somebody who hasn't been living in Taiwan for 25 years, that is a great excuse for me to get in touch with the community. But at a larger level, I feel like I can offer the fresh perspective, because this is not a job that everybody is doing every day. So what I see is not what everybody sees on a daily basis. So if I can offer my perspective and everybody can see the alternative, and they can come back and look at the settings. For example, I will put more attention whenever I come to Taiwan to see the foreign spouses and the foreign guest workers and their lives, and which are pretty much invisible in our daily life if you're just living in Taiwan. So I feel like I want to offer that perspective and to see what is in our everyday life, but we don't usually pay attention to. And if I can bring a fresh perspective, I think that is the best thing I can do through my pen and works.
All right, and you've certainly done a beautiful job.
Thank you.
And finally, I'm going to ask you, there are probably a lot of young people watching our program today. And they say, hey, 处士瑩 is cool. You know, I want to do what he does. And if they are thinking of volunteering and also, you know, possibly being an international voluntourist one day, like you are, and what would be some of the recommendations that you want to tell them? You know, what are some of the things they can start preparing for themselves now? So make sure that they possess the skills, as you mentioned, possess the qualities, possess the traits that are needed to be a very satisfying and rewarding international voluntourist.
Volunteering is about how to do the right thing.
Okay.
But you need to have you need to be open-minded in order to do things right.
Okay.
And that means you need to have listening skills and trying to find out what is really needed instead of what you want to offer.
Okay.
And get into the source of the problem and take a lot of thinking, soul-searching yourself, and eventually there's something good will come out of it.
Okay. And finally, you know, Cyril, you have wear many different hats in your career. You're one time working in the corporate sector, and you've been an international development worker for all these many years, and you're a writer also, and given your, you know, bicultural background, at least, you know, the U.S. and Taiwan, you know, what is your overall experience tells you, and would you, you know, if you had the opportunity of making the decision over again, would you have to done the same thing?
I probably would have even taken more risks and doing more and seeing more of the world younger.
Okay.
So I would not only doing exactly the same thing, but I also do more. So if you have the opportunity and have the luxury to make a decision to step out of the comfort zone, please do so.
Okay. And Cyril, it's certainly been a pleasure to have you on the program. We have learned about you through your writings before. Certainly, you know, having you on the program for 60 minutes, it's a real treat.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
And Cyril, I want to wish you and your family all the best in your professional and personal endeavors in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
All right. Thank you very much for watching our program today. I'll see you next time on MacroView Television. Thank you.